Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources to hopefully help improve your life. I'm Stu Reed. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Bernstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
Welcome, welcome. Well, here we are, another edition of Community and Technology. There's so much going on. I'm not sure where to begin. One of the things, before we get too heavy into the tech stuff, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in the news. And in particular, just some of the, the fake, contrived media that's out there. And, we've talked about this before. It just seems to be an ever worsening problem. In particular, one thing I wanted to bring up was this tweet by this House of Representatives guy. I think he's the #2 guy in the House, Steve Scalise. He tweeted a fake video where he doctored the audio of this young person that's ALS, a guy named Andy Barkin, who's an activist, and he actually edited some words into the conversation to make it seem as though the question that Joe Biden answered was different from the one he actually was posed. I just thought this was really amazing and brazen. And it took them a couple of days to even take it down. They said, oh, well, this was what Scalise's people initially said in response to being challenged. Oh, well, this was the intent of the interviewee's conversation. He may not have said this, but he meant it. And in particular, the question was, change the question to Biden about public safety, asking him, would he redirect some funding? And Biden's answer was yes. What he added in there was, would you redirect funding for the police? And that was never posed as a question in the interview. And just amazing. And it took a couple of days for Scalise to respond. And they finally did take it down, or they altered it back to the original clip. But they were relatively unapologetic, when they talked about it on the network news. And I wonder, Dave, what's your take on this? It just seems like this sort of thing is getting more and more brazen, where folks are just manipulating the media and just kind of putting outright lies out there. I guess maybe we shouldn't be surprised when the tone is set by the guy in the White House with his 20,000 lies and falsehoods. But this just seemed amazing. And by the way, this was a tweet, and I believe Twitter claimed it as false and misleading, and kind of red flagged it, if I'm not mistaken. Did you take a look at that at all, Dave? What's your take?
Well, we got lots of problems here, no simple answers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should just eliminate the entire newsfeed from Facebook and Twitter, because they can't police it decently. There are constantly going to be problems like this.
Mm-hmm.
And my source on that, well, is Facebook. They're taking ads all over Washington to show how responsible they are. They've hired 35,000 people to monitor things that shouldn't go over Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Given that there are massive numbers of things every day that continue to go over Facebook that are hateful, whether it be incitement to riot in Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
or lies and more lies out of the US government. So 35,000 isn't enough.
Yeah.
There'd never be enough. There's just so much. So is the solution to say, well, we should make Facebook responsible for everything? And Facebook will say, well, in that case, we can't show you anything, because guaranteed some things will go through. There's $1 million lawsuit against, I think it's Instagram that just came up in Canada. Somebody on Instagram accused a teacher of sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
He says it's not true and sued Instagram for libel. These are the kinds of problems that are there, and I don't have any easy answers to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, I guess if and when these platforms were treated as publishers as opposed to as platforms, perhaps the libel laws and other speech regulation might be more stringent and applicable. But I guess there's a downside to that as well. But you know, I mean, the problem just seems to be mounting and mounting. You know, and I'm looking at my notes. Twitter did label that tweet by Scalise as manipulated video, but it been up for some time. And as you know, so articulately say, there's so much of it. How are they going to police it all?
They can't.
You know,
It's
Trump.
impossible.
Yeah. Trump recently tweeted some lies about there being that the COVID-19 pandemic is not as deadly as officials are stating. And this is the president of the United States. And Twitter took the tweet down, saying it's no longer available because it violated the Twitter rules. But there's also, to your point, there's also a link on the tweet to Facebook allegations about COVID-19 conspiracy. And as of this writing, which was the day before yesterday, Facebook had not removed that posting. So it's a massive problem. And you know, do you have any idea what the scale of daily postings is to Facebook? It's got to be in the tens of millions, I imagine.
No, it's at least in hundreds of millions and maybe in the billions.
Wow. So
Yeah.
then when you look at 35,000 folks trying to monitor that, the ratio is crazy.
Yeah, especially because there's all kinds of things wrong with their system that's not designed to actually catch people. And it just turned out that the head of Facebook in India has been attacking government opponents personally.
Really?
Yeah, in emails to the Facebook staff is the stuff that came out publicly. And well, the odds are that if she's saying this about the government opponents, she's not objective about what could be said. And remember, Modi, who's done some things right, was denied a visa for the United States because of the terrorist acts that he condoned when he was a governor in India.
Mm.
That's the thing. So it's not obvious that Facebook is a good thing on balance. That's an amazing thing for me to say after all these years.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to succeed in killing Facebook. Facebook at the moment is telling the government of Australia, basically, forget about it. Australia's trying to set some rules about media, including media over Facebook, including that they pay for what it is. And Facebook has just said, well, in that case, we'll just turn off all the news in Australia. And that's going to, turning off Facebook or turning off Google is the kind of thing that brings down governments at this time. That's the kind of power they have.
Wow.
Facebook is also using that in England. England is trying to collect a 4% tax on Facebook. That's a lot less than the usual corporate tax. Well, they just said that if England tries to collect tax on them, they're just going to raise all their prices. And what can you do if you're somebody who wants to advertise and Facebook raises the price? There aren't other places to go. So we're looking at massive monopoly power, or that's actually a proper use of monopoly power semantically. Let's call it market power. And it's so big. Now, Cory Doctorow's just written a book that everybody is picking up, or a long essay, on how to defeat surveillance capitalism. This is the kind of thing that we have to do. And it's not,
You said how to defeat surveillance capitalism?
yeah,
Okay.
okay. Some of the things that people can do themselves and some of the things that need government regulation. But Facebook and Google around the world are so blatantly telling governments, no, you can't regulate us. That's frightening.
Yeah, I mean,
It's not quite as frightening.
it's a global monopoly. It's not just the U.S. It's a global monopoly.
Except for China.
Okay.
Okay.
Point taken.
No, it's an important thing because the question in much of the world is whether they should protect their own companies. Any country that's big enough, like India or Nigeria, to grow their own Twitter, Facebook, Airbnb. The taxi drivers in Nigeria went on strike this week because they think they were being ripped off by Uber. And the government wasn't doing anything about it. And the taxi drivers, well, whether the taxi drivers are ripped off, the state of Nigeria is being ripped off by Uber. 20 or 30% of the value of taxi rides in Lagos is going to California. Nigeria is a poor country. California is not. That really is not the way it should be. But that's the power of a few giant companies. And I'm just so frustrated. I don't know whether
Sure.
There.
I mean, it's crazy. You know, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have a state senator from New York, State Senator Mike Garanis is going to be on. He's going to talk about some pending legislation here in New York State for antitrust. But as you pointed out, with the exception of China, this is really an international, global problem, and it seems to be so much bigger than government. And I don't know what other force there is out there to counter, other than people. But you know,
and there's lots of things people can do.
Yeah.
Although I'm not going to go to Facebook alternative because I almost never use Facebook, but I certainly use a lot of Twitter and LinkedIn. And I don't really have much alternative if I'm trying to grow my business and get people to pay attention to the things I write. So I'm stuck there. There's been two interesting things on the question of monopoly power that just hit the news in the last 2 days. Not exactly the same thing we're talking about, but another one of the abuses is a patent system, where companies that have patents are asking for utterly ridiculous royalties. And the patent system has been rigged for a long time in favor of the company that owns the patent. Result: Daimler, Mercedes, until today, was facing an injunction that would forbid them from selling cars in Germany. Why? Cars today all have a telematics unit that connects the car into the wireless network. There are about 9,000 patents on 4G and 5G wireless. Nokia and Ericsson own a pile of them. And what are they asking? They're committed to asking for reasonable royalties. Fair enough. There's nothing wrong with patents and royalties on what they do, but they're asking for the royalties based on the value of the entire car if it happens to be connected to a wireless network. Way out of line.
Yeah.
Similarly, we just got Daimler and three or four other US car makers and Intel saying the FCC's case against Qualcomm on something similar should go forward, even though an appeals court all but destroyed it, because it's so important. Because Qualcomm, in wireless, we call this the Qualcomm tax. They want 5% of the value of your phone. Now, since they have maybe 10, 15% of the patents. There are lots of different ways to measure this, and many of them are invalid, but that's beside the point. That would imply that if all the patent holders made the same claim as Qualcomm, the price of your phone would go up 50%.
Wow.
Now, cheap phones are the way the world is getting connected.
Mhm.
400 million people in India are connected to the internet via mobile, 4G. So it's not that, so it's a decent connection. You can watch video, although you do have caps to deal with. Raising the cost of phones in Africa and India is going to mean an awful lot of people will not be connected. Period. And that's why this is a big issue.
Yeah.
And why I keep coming back to it. Let's go to good news.
Okay,
Can I tell
well,
you about
before we do
phones?
that, let me just mention that we are here broadcasting and streaming live on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem from City College. You're listening to Community and Technology with Dave Bursey and Stu Reed, and we're talking about technology. I've been talking about some of the issues with social media and their gigantic monopoly positions internationally. And Dave has some good news he's going to share with us. Dave.
Competition can work really well. Mostly it doesn't, because it takes at least 4 and usually more like 7 or 10 companies competing to get the miracles of the capitalist system to work fairly well.
Mm.
But there are 15 companies trying to make 5G phones in China.
15.
15.
Mm-hmm.
You know some of them because they've made it to the United States. Xiaomi, Motorola, T-Mobile has the Revel, which is TCL. We're starting to see Oppo and Vivo. ZTE is on the Verizon network. And I can give you a whole pile of names.
So these are all separate manufacturers. Is that right, Dave?
These are all separate manufacturers.
Okay.
There's only 3 chip makers.
Ah, okay.
So the price of chips is an issue, but right now that's being fairly competitive and has come all the way down. And that's come all the way down. So let me throw that at you because I've got some things there that's going to surprise people.
Okay.
Right now, if you were out buying a phone in September of 2020, would you buy a 4G or a 5G phone?
Well, you know, from what I've learned talking to you over the last year or so, especially the last 6 months, you know, I haven't heard any readily compelling reasons why I would go with 5G. I haven't heard that yet. I'd be tempted because of all the advertising and the marketing that we're seeing in the media, but I haven't heard a compelling reason. So I'll suspect 4G is cheaper given that they're the older technology. So I'd probably go with 4G to answer your question.
Yeah. And that's because the cheapest 5G phone, and it's going on sale tomorrow at T-Mobile, is $400.
Wow, that's the
TCL level. That's a lot cheaper than it was a few months ago when you couldn't get a 5G phone in the US for less than about $800.
Wow.
And Apple is going to come in at $1,000 in the near future. In China, you would buy a 5G phone. That's because the prices in China in the last month have gone down to $145. That's last week's announcement for a 6.5-inch phone with 3 cameras, lots of other goodies, a perfectly decent phone.
Wow.
5G. That's what competition can do when you really have competition. There's another one. That one is from Realme. There's another one, which is a substantial company. They're like number 3 in India, for example. There's another one that came in at $199 from Xiaomi, which is the number 1 seller in India and is big in Europe. We don't know them much in the US. And there's a dozen phones between $145 and $250, all 6.5 inches, all at least 3 cameras, lots of other good specs. Some of them have big batteries and things like that. So if you were in China, Yeah, there's no practical advantage to 5G for most of what we do today. In China and in T-Mobile next year, it is going to be somewhat faster. It probably isn't going to matter because it doesn't matter if, what would you be able to do if instead of the 50 meg that's typical on a 4G phone, you got 250 meg on a 5G phone? How would that affect you?
You know, I don't think it would affect me per se, but you know, maybe I'd have a better video viewing experience. Maybe if I
Yeah,
wanted
video,
to
you're gonna
cast
see.
my cell phone video to a TV, maybe it might look better. But you know, I'm a little bit at a loss. What would you say? I mean, from
That's a
your
trick question. There's nothing at this point.
okay.
Okay, a 4K video is 15 megabits.
Hmm.
If you have 250 megabits or 50 megabits, it looks exactly the same,
Hmm.
as long as you have substantially more than what the video needs. And we're not talking, and you can imagine what a 4K video is on a small size cell phone. You can't tell the difference.
Yeah, what's the difference? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So there's no practical
Hmm.
thing. There is in the United States, finally, some decent 5G. T-Mobile is building quite rapidly a network that will probably get you 200, 300 megabits most of the time.
Wow.
You don't need it. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what you're going to do. But you may very well have things you want to do in 2 or 3 years.
Hmm.
So if you could buy a 5G phone for about the same price as a 4G phone, it would make sense. So in China, I would buy a 5G, and with a little bit of luck, the Chinese competition will get to the United States and bring our prices down.
So,
It
David,
costs,
is it just market forces that are responsible for that price disparity, or is it a different phone? I mean, would the phones that are 150 bucks in China work over here? And it's just market forces driving the prices up?
it would work just fine. They all use the mid-band spectrum.
Hmm.
The odds are, and in fact, I may try to get a phone from China, that any of the Chinese 5G phones will work fine on T-Mobile's 5G network. Not on Verizon, which is using a different spectrum, but on T-Mobile should be just fine. T-Mobile is now maybe in 10% of the country.
Hmm.
It'll probably be in a third of the country by the end of this year. So you will be able to get really good speeds and more than half of the country early next year.
Hmm.
On AT&T and Verizon, they're choosing to go with a bastardized form of 5G, which actually is slower than 4G. It's called low band. And it will get you, the 5G literally is slower than the 4G in many
Wow.
places.
What's
We
what,
just,
what's the point? What's the point of that? What's driving
that people have heard that 5G is wonderful and they want 5G.
that?
They're giving you 5G. If you look at the Verizon ads, they never tell you how fast it is.
Hmm.
If you look at their claims, many of them are lies. Telefonica just came out with the claim that their new 5G has 1 millisecond latency. That's really getting fast back and forth.
Hmm.
I will lay odds that the 5G, which they're about to turn on in the next couple of weeks, will have at least 15 milliseconds of latency and probably something close to what was just tested by the Houston Chronicle on AT&T in Houston, who went out with 27 tests, and all but 3 or 4 of them had latency above 30 milliseconds.
Mm. Wow.
Okay, now,
That's a big difference, 30 to 1.
yeah,
Mhm.
and that's just typical. Did you see Verizon got caught on that, on their
Yes, I
ads?
did. I did. I saw that. Was it the Federal Trade Commission? Somebody slapped them and told them they had to change up their advertising from calling it the most powerful network, I believe was the language.
And what does the most powerful network mean? All wireless towers put out the same amount of power. It
Hmm.
turns out that Verizon does have the fastest 5G network in the world, which in the last independent test reached 0.4% of the United States.
Hmm.
So if they said we have the fastest 5G network, they're about to turn on their low and mid-band 5G, which is going to be at 4G speeds.
No, which is not the most powerful network. Wow. So was that the cross that got caught in with the advertising, or I
It
mean,
was
what are the
some
particulars?
kind of advertising board that they subscribed to.
Mm,
And they even appealed it, saying, "What's wrong?
mm.
This is just ordinary advertising. Everybody lies in
Right.
advertising. It's called puffery, and it's
Mhm.
actually legal." The Supreme Court has said puffery in advertising is illegal.
Wow.
But they didn't do that. But all around the world, I'm seeing this enormous amount of nonsense.
Mhm.
Now, if we got lots of 5G for America, what would that do for the US economy?
I don't know. I was going to ask you to indulge me and look into your crystal ball and what maybe down the road are some new applications or things that we can do to take advantage of this increased capability. If all we can do is just what we're already doing, I don't see the point or the impact on the economy.
Overwhelmingly, it's going to be what we're still doing for years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked hard. And I've asked people. So let me throw it to you. If you can't think of anything you would do differently with 5G instead of the 4G, what would the impact on the American economy be? That's a rigged question.
Mm-hmm.
Because the phone companies, women in DC at CTIA, just put out another piece of garbage about the trillions it would add to the United States economy in the next few years. Now, if you can tell me how something that doesn't do anything different can add trillions to the economy, well, if you could tell them that, you could get a $500,000 contract from the phone companies to write a study that claims that. But it's utter and total nonsense, and we see far too much about it.
That sounds like way beyond puffery to me, Dave.
No, it's outright fraud.
Yeah.
And people like the chairman of the FCC, who wants to be an honest man, I disagree with, he's a conservative Trumpist. And I disagree with him on a lot of things, but I know him well enough to be honest, has been totally fooled because you repeat the same lie enough times and people start to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And let's go into that after we do our station break. I think it's time.
Okay, yes, it is. You're listening to WHCR 90.3, the voice of Harlem, broadcasting and streaming live from City College in Harlem, New York. You're listening to Community and Technology with Dave Bernstein and Stu Reed. And we've been talking about the latest trends in technology, from the consolidation of the social media giants that are doing all kinds of, or enabling, I should say, all kinds of trickery with the messaging that's going out, to the latest in 5G claims, and where the technology is going or not going. And Dave, where did you want to segue to?
I wanted to take that because we're talking about enormous lies by the phone company, both to sell you 5G and to get what they want out of Washington. But I can't call them big lies because that's Godwin's law. Big lies was the term that was used by Goebbels and the Nazis.
And I'm not big lies. That's what you're saying, Dave?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
Big lie is something that's totally untrue, but you repeat it enough times, people believe it. Goebbels was the one who really convinced the world of that. So I'm not going to call anything that we're talking about. But let me go back into that time of history, because there's something that's not technology, but really scared me. Portland. I don't know who shot who. I don't know who's beating up who. I know there's a lot of that going on in the streets of Portland. That was what it was like in 1927 in Germany, with the communists and the Nazis literally killing each other in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
And we know how that turned out.
Yeah, not so good.
It is a powerful argument to say, to Antifa in particular, the violence is not worth it. Now, we're not the same as Germany in 1927. And Trump lies a whole lot, but that doesn't make him a Hitler. But I bring up that horrifying example because we really have to make sure it doesn't go that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I sure hope we're not in much danger. Let's go to something happier. What other news do we have, Stu?
Not a whole lot of happy stuff, but one positive thing that Microsoft just announced that they came out with some new software that is able to spot deep fakes in disinformation. And I just wanted to, I know we've talked about deep fakes before on the show, and I just wanted to kind of reprise what that is for our listeners and viewers out there. And I'm reading from a recent story in CNET. Anyway, the deep fake is a technology that is shorthand for video or audio recordings that are manipulated by a computer to say or appear to do anything that the user wants, and has increasingly become easier to use and harder to spot, creating an opportunity for potentially catastrophic meddling in politics and elections. And this has been going on for a while. The technology of making deepfake audio and video is getting better and better. And Microsoft has just announced a set of software, I guess algorithms, to help spot those kind of fakes. Now, the content creators or the content receivers have to send their content to Microsoft for Microsoft to analyze it. But Microsoft apparently has software that can analyze it and identify deepfake content versus authentic content. And, hopefully that's a bit of a breakthrough. We talked at the top of the show about the House of Representatives guy, Steve Scalise, editing a audio clip to make it that he posted on Twitter to essentially change a question posed to vice presidential candidate and presidential candidate Joe Biden. That was caught because the person in the interview with Biden, raised a red flag. He, said, I didn't ask that question. That was a manipulation. But in other situations, there can be, and I'm sure will be, deepfake audio and video content that's put out there. And who knows how long it's going to take to catch it. And it has to be spotted and sent to this Microsoft algorithm in order to authenticate it. So I think it's great that the software is there, but how it gets actually deployed and used in the real media world, I'm not sure how that's going to happen.
I can give you some perspective of that from a university professor of engineering who's been working on that same problem.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, as soon as he came up with techniques that could spot the fakes, the people making fakes came up with new ways to do it that got around his technique.
Mm.
So it's like trying to keep viruses off your computer,
mm-hmm.
keep the US government outside of your email and your computer. You can do a whole lot, but then they just, in fact, that's what's happening in the 5G security. People like the CEO of Verizon just said 5G is very secure. It's utter and total garbage. I can give you a dozen papers of ways that 5G is being cracked and will be cracked.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what does that look like, Dave? I mean, you think it's a telephone network? Are we talking about eavesdropping and listening? What are we talking about when you crack a 5G network? What happens? What does that look like?
Well, you certainly will be able to get what's going across.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, you will be able to get control of the user system. Did you see the story on Tesla this week?
No, I did not. What was that?
It just came public, but it happened 3 years ago. One of the Tesla owners was a retired engineer, and he was doing things like repairing Teslas and working through their software. And he figured out how to connect to Tesla's server and send commands to any Tesla in the United States. Really. Now, he was one of the white hat guys. He told Tesla what was going on. And when they weren't sure to believe him, he said, okay, give me the serial number of one of the Teslas in your parking lot. And he gave it a command to move backwards 20 feet. And it did.
Wow.
Now, he reported it to Tesla. Tesla fixed that one. They paid him $50,000 as a bug bounty for catching it. That's not quite the price of a new Tesla, but it, is responsible behavior on both parts. But that's the reality. We both know Vint Cerf. Vint was one of the people who created the internet. What he did with he and Bob Kahn with TCP/IP turns out to be a work of historical genius, because right now, 50 years later, on a device he couldn't even have imagined when he first set up the internet protocols, I'm talking to you over TCP/IP, and while we don't have that big an audience, it could be 1 million people listening and watching, and it still works. That's really brilliant.
Yeah.
It's been involved with the battle against the continuous government effort to demand that every system, like Apple iPhones, be crackable by the government. And Vint has a very simple, clear answer that every technologist I know agrees with. There's no way you can make it crackable by the government that sooner or later somebody else, which might be the Russian or Chinese government, or the North Korean, or a 14-year-old kid in Florida, 17-year-old kid in Florida was the last one, will crack. You can't have that kind of security. Now, 5G turns out to be very vulnerable to problems because it's designed to be decentralized. It's designed to hook up to 1 billion connections of things, like your car.
It's what Internet of Things is kind of where it's
Now, most of that actually won't go over 5G. It's going to be just like mine is right now. It's going to be Wi-Fi in the home, because you don't have to pay the phone company for that. But 5G is distributed both in terms of eventually billions of connections of Internet of Things all over the place. And some of those devices are going to be really easy to get into. Guaranteed, when you're talking about that many devices of different types. In addition to which, the network itself is set up to be decentralized. That instead of having this great big switch that's in the middle of the network where professionals can monitor, run it, and put on security, you're going to have another box that may be on every cell tower in the country that's part of the network with intelligence and danger if somebody cracked into it.
Yeah, so those are all points of vulnerability and access.
Yeah, with the threat plane.
Wow. But listening to you talk, Dave, let me just see that I understand. Because it sounds like as we look at the landscape of how 5G is going to be deployed as it rolls out, Internet of Things, more and more of our infrastructure is going to be run and managed on 5G. So you're talking about power, you're talking about traffic control, you're talking about water control, you're talking about so many of the vital utilities and services that keep the economy, that keep the country moving. All those could be potentially compromised by the 5G security weaknesses.
And the people making this stuff are very aware of it. people like Nokia and Ericsson have book-length white papers about what you have to do to secure your 5G network because it's that much harder. And just like many things have been cracked in our current network, 5G is not going to be totally secure, even if the CEO of Verizon says it is. But let's go back to Vint Cerf. Vint is not a very political person, or he's a very political person. He's in the middle of an awful lot of things in Washington and tech policy. But he doesn't often do things like endorse candidates. Last week, he endorsed Ed Markey in the Democratic primary for Senate in Massachusetts. And the very good news is that Ed Markey last night won over Joe Kennedy in Massachusetts, despite the Kennedy name and the Kennedy reputation, and a lot of people who voted for Kennedy because they respected his grandfather. This is actually an important race, which is why people like Vintage Zuckernecken, because there's been nobody in Congress for the last 25 years who has done more to protect consumers and networks and encourage competition than Ed Markey.
Really?
In the House and then in the Senate. So that everybody from Vint Cerf to science fiction novelist Cory Doctorow to me, who doesn't usually have anything to say about a Massachusetts politician, stuck their neck out and said, this is an important race.
Well, Dave, tell us a little bit, if you can, just thumbnail background on Ed Markey. I know his name, but I really have no sense of what he has done for technology and privacy in terms of legislation.
Anything you can think of that was an important move that in Congress, in privacy, in competition and telecom, in freedom of information, in security as network under hurricanes, Markey was always in the middle of it. Always. Going back to the 1980s.
Wow.
74 now. He's been doing this a long time. Oh, and the other endorsement came from him, AOC in Queens.
Really?
Who said, yeah.
Wow.
Who said he's 74 years old, but his thoughts are younger than anybody else's, and gave him a very strong endorsement. Among other things, Markey, who's now in the Senate, was the co-sponsor of AOC's bill on the Green New Deal.
That's right. Okay. I remember that now.
Okay. And there's issue after issue. He's been on the consumer side. So a lot of us thought it was god-awful that Kennedy is probably a decent guy, probably on the right side of most of these issues, but Markey has delivered for 40 years. I'm very glad he's going to be reelected.
So he was the incumbent in the senatorial race in Massachusetts, is that right?
Right.
Okay.
And it's a state where there are not that many Republicans. The Democratic primary was what counted. So he's going back to the Senate. That's really good news.
Besides the AOC proposal, is there anything in particular that Markey has identified that he's going to get behind in the new term?
Almost anything you believe in, he's spoken out on. And lately, he was not so sure. There are votes of his from the 1990s that were maybe not so progressive on things like welfare. But he's seen Washington for 40 years now. He understands what's what. And he's basically saying, I'm 74 years old. I'm going to tell the truth as eloquently as I can, and the heck with the consequences. And you can just look at his tweet stream, and he's eloquent on subject after subject. Or Larry Irving's tweet stream, who repeats everything of Markey's. Larry worked for him for 10 years before he became Bill Clinton's head of NTIA and defined the digital divide and things like that.
Mhm.
He also once said he was going to put me through a wall and I should watch my back when I'm out at night, because one night he's going to come and when I least expect it and get me.
Oh my goodness, that's a little threatening.
Oh, it was 10 minutes of threats like that. He was very angry. I said that given what AT&T was paying people who advocate for them, he was totally underpaid at $250,000.
Mhm.
He was pushing some of the AT&T stuff really hard. And I was really surprised because in that conversation I figured that it was he felt he should compromise and give AT&T some in order to get AT&T support on issues that might be more important. Larry's a good guy in general. I actually supported him in 2004 if the Democrats won the presidency for the FCC chair. Not that my support meant very much, although I knew a lot of the people there. But no, he came back and he absolutely believes some total nonsense like AT&T would build more broadband if you didn't require them to give the TV offering in poor neighborhoods.
Wow, he should know better than that. But
He should, I was sure he did, but no, that's the kind of thing that happens in Washington.
Mhm.
They hire people, often for millions. As I say, Larry was wildly underpaid at only $250,000 a year, although it was a part-time gig.
Mhm.
And he didn't like being accused of being a lobbyist because this was in the middle of the Obama campaign, and he was going to be very influential in the transition.
And you're pulling the covers off.
So he did not like being a lobbyist. So he came up with some really wild threats. It was almost funny.
Mm.
I haven't spoken to him since. He's been on the right side of almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
But
where is he now? Is he in government now? Do you know?
he's in Washington. He's back doing public advocacy work. It's not clear who's paying him.
Mm.
His old partner at IIA, who was the Republican head of NTIA, and did file lobbying paperwork on the same thing that Larry didn't. That was really funny when it came up, because it turned out his partner filed as a lobbyist on the same thing that Larry said, I'm not a lobbyist.
Who was that?
I'm forgetting his name.
Okay.
Melman. The two Melmans, I think this one is Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
The other was an operative who elected Bush. They're brothers. And, good guy, always been friendly to me. I get along with with the most improbable people in Washington. And it turns out most of the conservative Republicans know what the big businesses are doing and how corrupt the system is.
Mm.
And some of them even try to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's another discussion.
Mm.
In any case, Ed Markey is going back to Washington. I'm very glad. We're all enormously scared. Lori Garrett, a highly reliable source on what's happening in medicine, is confident that on November 1st, and she has evidence of this in stuff from the CDC and so on, is going to start vaccinating people in the United States in order to win the election with a vaccine that we're not really sure is going to be effective or safe.
Wow, she's saying the CDC is going to start?
No, it wasn't the CDC. It was whichever the Federal Health Administration is. And
Wow.
she found a note from them. They've chosen a big drug wholesaler, McKesson. This is going in the news cycle, and you'll see it in the Times tomorrow, probably. To all the state coordinators, asking them to waive any silly requirements that makes it harder for McKesson to get people vaccinated starting November 1st.
Silly requirement.
Yeah, just get rid of them. It's so important to get the vaccine out. Now, I don't think it's crazy to start vaccinating people with a vaccine that may not work and may have side effects. that it may very well be that even though we're not sure the potential gains from the vaccination, may be, it's not crazy, even if they don't have any good testing. They just have a little bit. And they just have a little bit, but they have the little bit so far hasn't shown up anything serious about side effects, but side effects might not show up for 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
And they don't have 6 months.
Thalidomide, you know, that's a scary proposition to me, Dave. And you know, my sense is it's not at all motivated by health concerns, but it's motivated by political election concerns. So, you know, I would not give those guys a pass myself if I
wouldn't give them a pass, but I would say it's not a crazy idea. I once had to make that decision. 30 years ago, my mother had lung cancer.
Mm.
It wasn't looking very good. So I'm a pretty good researcher. I went out to the scientific literature and found all the latest stuff, including one treatment, some kind of activated T cell type thing that were grown outside your body and put back in. That was being investigated at the National Institute of Health. Turned out it didn't work, but we weren't going to know that for 2 or 3 years. And my mother, who was going to die in a few months and did, went to see a doctor who was in a position to get her that treatment, even though the odds were very long against it doing any good. But given that she was going to die, we thought it might be interesting. And he said, no, it just wasn't going to work. It would kill her right away.
Mm-hmm.
30 years later, incidentally, they're coming up with things like those activated T cells that seem to be working in cancer. But those back then didn't work. So I was willing, with my mother, to go with a totally unproven, untried treatment that had a limited amount of data, probably 8 patients or so at the National Institute of Health, which is the situation then.
Well, you know, I can relate to that, Dave. My mom also passed away from lung cancer, and you know, we would have tried any treatment, experimental or otherwise, if there was any chance that it could have saved her. So I certainly understand that. But in a situation where folks are not yet sick, they are not terminally ill, to push out a vaccine that has not been thoroughly tested, you know, I would really hesitate to do that. And as I said, I don't think it's being done because folks are really concerned about protecting people from the disease. I think it's being done for political purposes. If we saw that same kind of energy being put out there to quarantine, to test and trace, to wear masks and that kind of preventive stuff, I think we would be seeing a much better result right now today. So
don't hear me wrong.
We'll see.
Tony Fauci is right to say that it's stupid to put it out until we have enough data. And I trust Tony Fauci on something like this. So I got to know reporting on AIDS 35 years ago. He really does give a damn. And he's 79, but he's still sharp as a whip.
Okay, well,
I was just saying
that, you know, he certainly is, and that's something we got to watch.
Yeah, I was just saying it's not necessarily crazy. COVID is serious enough that not crazy people might want to go to a vaccine that's only partially tested. That has nothing whatsoever to do with what Washington is doing just before the election, as you said.
I got you. Okay, well, we're about out of time. I want to thank you, Dave. It's been a very insightful conversation as usual. Thanks for being here and helping to keep our audience informed and enlightened about what's going on in the latest tech.
What are the guests we have lined up for the future? Who are the guests?
Well, we've got a number of folks potentially. We've got let me see. We've got Ruha Benjamin from Princeton University. She's an expert on automated decision making and algorithmic bias. We're hoping to book her sometime September, October. We've got Greta Byram, who's a professor at the New School, who's been actively involved in the digital census platform and what's going on with that. So she's been on the show about a year or so ago. I want to invite her back to give us an update. There's a gentleman named Beirut Seth, who is the CEO of Gumpshop, which is a company that is involved in creating algorithms that help eliminate bias in automated intelligence systems. We've got Nicole Turner Lee, who is confirmed for a couple of weeks from now, September 23rd. She is at the Brookings Institute Center for Technology Innovation. So, and we also have
Real Washington Insider.
Yeah,
so he can help with some interesting questions.
And we also have Senator Mike Giorinis, New York State Senator, who is about to confirm for sometime in September to talk about the antitrust legislation he has pending in the New York State Senate. So we got a bunch of exciting stuff coming up.
Sounds really good.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks again, Dave, and thank you to our listening audience out there. You've been listening to Community and Technology with Stu Reed and Dave Burstein on WHCR 90.3, the voice of Harlem. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.
Out on my way